right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. First off, this is a live recording of the BS and Beer Show. We are a grassroots network of people that first started off getting together in person in Portland, Maine, a little over a decade ago to talk about building science. And when the pandemic hit, we missed this interaction and ability to commiserate with each other. And so we started connecting on Zoom. And then people started to show up, and more people started to show up, and it's turned into a thing now. So my name's Ben Bogey. I'm a builder, project manager in Connecticut.
I'm Emily Mottram. I am an architect in Maine.
And author.
Oh,
and author of the Pretty Good House book.
Great book. Pre-order on Amazon.
Or at your local bookseller.
Or at your local bookseller.
I'm Travis Brungart. I'm a builder in Prairie Village, Kansas. My partner Joe, who's around you. Hey, Joe. At Catalyst Construction. And we, of course, have...
I'm Joe Stiebrick. I'm not a builder.
You got to talk into the mic more,
Lean
Daddy.
in real close.
Joe's my dad.
I'm Joe Stiebrick.
There we go.
I am not a builder.
But he is my dad. I'm Christine Williamson. I'm a building scientist, daughter of Joe Stiebrick.
I'm not sure which one of those is worse.
It's a lose-lose, isn't that?
No.
It's really bad. I'm an engineer, and I married an architect, and the therapy bills have been insane for the last 50 years.
So the premise around tonight's conversation is Joe, you've been coming to this show for a number of years. You as well, Christine.
Actually, no. This is only my second year.
Oh, this is only your second year. Well,
I didn't know he was famous until I came here. It's not true.
And you came back?
And I was like, wow, everybody knows him.
So presumably, what we want to do is we want to kind of pick your brains a little bit, sir, about where the industry has been and maybe what you've seen as this show evolved over the years and the industry's evolved, and talk about where we are now as an industry, and then maybe be so gauche as to talk about where we might be headed as an industry. So would you enlighten us with where we were when you started coming to this show and what was common?
Well, I would rather say that we've become insanely sophisticated.
Closer to the mic.
What?
Closer to the mic.
Eat the mic.
I'm going to do a Phil
Yeah.
Donahue thing here.
All right.
He used to be never mind, long time ago.
So back about the time that you started coming to this show.
Ouch.
I've been coming here for over 35 years. So what's most impressive is the sophistication and the depth of knowledge in the show today. It's actually insanely impressive, and we've gone from very, very simple construction techniques with simple materials and candidly quite simple performance to some insanely wonderful developments. A way of thinking of this, my first car was a 1960 Ford Galaxy 500, and I could lift the hood and recognize a carburetor and a spark plug, and I could, and now, I've got, turbocharged engine with, computer. There's more computer power in my car than went to the moon with Apollo 11. When I first started, music used to go on these black discs at 45 RPM, and now I've got thousands of songs on my phone. Well, our industry has gone through that kind of a revolution and evolution. You should be all insanely proud of how sophisticated and advanced we've become. The only people that don't appreciate how wonderful the American construction industry are Americans. If you want to travel to the rest of the world, you won't recognize stuff unless you're really, really old, because what is modern there is what we did at the time of Elvis Presley, not Elvis Costello. Just to
Trade with me, Joe.
So
There we go.
So what drove the changes? Well, we've become insanely energy efficient, and that comes with good things and the bad thing. Because we've become more energy efficient, there's less energy going from the inside to the outside and the outside to the inside. And there's no such thing as a free thermodynamic lunch. What happens is that energy, when we were building out 1,000-year-old trees with no insulation and rocks, buildings could get wet and they would dry because they were energy pigs, because energy exchange requires drying. So as we become more and more energy efficient, we have reduced the drying potential, so we've had to become sophisticated in reducing the wetting potential. We never used to flash under windows, and we never used to flash under doors. We didn't have to because it was incidental water. Now that water isn't incidental, and we've changed the way we install every window and door, and in a good way. That's actually quite remarkable. And you youngsters don't know this, but we used to go to places called forests, and we used to, yes, we used to cut trees down and cut them into boards and build boats out of them and sail them around the world. And try doing that with a sheet of OSB, right? You know, and so
I think I saw that on YouTube once.
yeah, well, so you think about this. Our materials are more and more moisture sensitive. We have less of a drying potential, but we've come to terms with all of that, and we're building insanely spectacular, high-performance buildings, and we ought to be insanely proud of it. And again, nobody knows except us in this room.
I saw, along those lines, I saw a presentation that somebody gave in the industry. This was a few years ago. I think this theme has been repeated a few times, but the presentation opened with a photo of, I don't know, like I could tell the story better if I knew history better, but a photo of like what it looked like where they assembled like the first cars. And then they showed a photo, I think of that, probably in Stuttgart, of that, is it a VW factory that is just so high tech? And they showed these two photos side by side, and the point was showing, look at how innovative the auto industry has become over this period of years. And then the next slide was a photo of a construction site from like back in, it was like all sepia toned, like pioneer days, whatever. And then a photo of a modern construction site taken at the same angle, roughly the same size of the home being framed. And the point was, everybody kind of, I was so surprised because it was a professional audience, and they kind of laughed a little bit. And the idea was that we haven't done anything in our industry. And I was like, whoa, I didn't say this, obviously, I didn't interrupt to say it, but it was like, well, those two photos only look to look the same if you don't know anything about construction. Like, there's a lot that's different in those two photos. Like, we have dimensional lumber now, we're flashing our windows, we're using insulation. Like, that house from the pioneer days is a lot different from the stuff that we're seeing around here now. But I don't know, we don't like to give ourselves credit, I guess.
It's true. I have friends that operate as framers up in Maine, and they're very good framers. And they have a piece of equipment now which blew my mind. Everybody knows what a lull is, a telehandler or something like that. They have this machine now that they use on their job site that operates completely from a remote control. So literally what they'll do is they'll build all their walls out in the yard, and then they'll go stand up on the deck of the building with this little remote control pack, and they'll pick them up from the yard, swing them, and set them into place. Now, this is not some wildly advanced construction crew.
Wow.
This is the current state of our industry that we're in right now. And what that means is that they're able to produce buildings faster and cleaner and more efficiently. So,
And more comfortable.
yeah, hopefully.
Tastes great, less filling.
Thank you, Rice. So,
Very true.
where are we headed?
Oh man, where are we headed? I mean,
Tell us the future.
oh yeah, I mean, I've only predicted the future correctly, never.
It's tough.
How's that stock choice working out for you, Joe?
Well,
I'm still
All right, so
waiting
what
for the
are-
hoverboards.
so what are the odds that we're going to continue to be more energy efficient? Pretty high.
Yeah.
Which means that the drying potentials are going to be significantly lower.
Lower.
What are the odds that we're going to be able to be building out of 1,000-year-old trees and rocks? Slim to none, and Slim has just left town. What are the odds that we're going to care about carbon stuff? I mean, all right. So, and we're talking about eliminating concrete. We're talking about changing the way we do our energy balances and auditing. I have a side note. if we did our tax forms the way we're currently doing our carbon accounting, the IRS would all put us in prison. All right, but just as a side note. And so the question is that those are going to be tremendous drivers for innovation and change. And now we're superimposing COVID, and you all don't appreciate this yet, or maybe some of you do, but there are people who don't know anything about building that are telling us how to do building. Like, this would be the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta and the Harvard School of Public Health, which are incredibly knowledgeable about construction practices.
That's who I turn to for my professional insights.
I think that's, they should maybe go down the street to MIT, but that's another story. So they're talking about increasing the interior relative humidities to between 40 and 60%. There isn't a new house that's built that can handle that in the wintertime. And we can't handle that in old buildings. The only people that are going to be happy with this are the fire people, because the buildings are going to be too wet to burn.
But then the insurance companies are going to be mad because they're all going to turn into mold and rot and collapse into the ground.
Well, right. So the idea is that we're going to have to come to terms with this, and we are. We're in the forefront of this, and we have to start saying, okay, if you actually really want to do this, we're going to have to build our houses like the way we build museums, hospitals, art galleries, and data processing centers and indoor swimming pools. Or we're going to have to maybe change our approach. Maybe we only have those humidities in cold climates during the non-cold months. In other words, we have them for 8 or 9 months a year, and we don't have them for 3 months a year. So we save the people for 9 months and save the building for 3 months. But that's coming our way. Everybody's buying humidifiers right now, and a humidifier, in my view, is a bioweapon from ISIS, because it's.
Don't hold any punches now, Joe.
Well, but it's insane. I mean, go to the Mayo Clinic website, and it says if you have a humidifier, use distilled water. I see that all the time, don't you?
Oh, I have gallons of it in my house.
And then they also say take apart your humidifier every 3 days and clean it. Sure, all the time. I don't see any issue with this at all.
With a little toothbrush to get in around those little valves and stuff. Sure.
And then, we have to double and triple our ventilation rates. Sure. How? In the South, we're going to have to invest in dehumidifiers. Up north, air changes will be so high, so dry, we're going to have humidifiers. And then to save energy, we're going to need energy recovery ventilators. Remember The Graduate, 1967, the movie? They said that the future is plastics. Our future is humidifiers, dehumidifiers, ERVs, and mold remediation. That's how you're going to invest.
You're preaching to the choir on the mold remediation.
This is not meant as a joke.
I do.
Your spidey sense ought to be tingling. That was a movie that they ruined when they, turned it into a movie.
I have to share just a little interesting aside because you'll enjoy this. My wife has been, it's dry in the winter and we live in an old achy house, so we have humidifiers. So she puts a humidifier into our bedroom and then she cracks the window. And it's like 12 degrees outside. So I'm like, you're just wasting your time here. This is the placebo effect. All that humidity is flowing right out the window. And we're not doing anything. But she doesn't listen to me because I'm just some quack with a beard.
Well, I agree with her. About the window. No, not that.
Nice recovery.
No, and to be serious about this, we have the knowledge in this room. We have the technology to do these things, to actually make it work, but it means changing, like a lot. And the question is, are we going to? And I believe that, guess what? Indoor air quality is going to be a big deal. Ventilation is a big deal. A high efficiency filtration for real, none of that electrostatic ozone crap. Sorry, none of the, not the stuff that doesn't work that's sold on eBay late at night.
You mean the stuff that's sold in basically every trade store that you can walk into in the country?
Yeah, well, but we're kind of smart, and we can actually do this. And so we changed the way we build because of energy conservation, and we're pretty good. We're going to change the way we build and operate our buildings because of controlling the indoor environment, and that's why it's so neat to be at a show like this, because you see the dynamic interaction of these things. And so, I'm looking forward to the next 10 or 20 years, because we're going to have to change everything again. And the big issue is not the new stuff. New buildings with a clean sheet of paper, we can do that. It's the existing stuff. How are we going to rehabilitate, enhance it, and then be able to do all of these things? And I don't believe we can do all of these things. We can pick and choose maybe the important ones and do them only at a certain particular time. This is going to be awesome. You guys are, okay, this is a, exciting time.
I'm ready.
Yay!
I'm
Woo.
fired up. Let's go.
Yeah.
Sounds like the next book.
I don't do books no more. It's the video thing,
I guess that for me, one of the things that's come out of this pandemic that's kind of fulfilling in a nerdy sense is it used to only be in little silos like this that we would talk about things like indoor air quality and about filtration and stuff like that. If there's a gold side to this whole experience that we've all gone through is the fact that we now have indoor air quality and filtration and ventilation rates being talked about broadly in the community. Now, there's a possibility that this might just ebb and disappear after the pandemic winds up, whenever that happens. But I'm hoping that it doesn't. I hope that we've kind of really driven home this idea that ventilation and filtration does matter. And I think the other thing that's come out of this that goes hand in hand with that is that we've maybe taken on a new appreciation for our homes because we're all spending so much time there. And I think people are starting to maybe value the quality of their home and the effort that goes into having a good quality home or a pretty good quality home. We're taking those things seriously now because I think, in a lot of ways, much of the industry was in a race to the bottom as well as we were progressing. But I think maybe we're seeing hopefully a cultural sea change of people starting to appreciate these things that will help to push this forward.
Yeah, I think we've done a segment on this before. You talked about it on the stage, things we can learn from commercial construction. Now that we're all working from home, we're using our homes in a different way. And there's lots of things that we can learn from that, especially on the ventilation side, where they've thought about it. It's a different animal, but we're home. That whole 90% of your time indoors is now like 90% of your time in the same room.
One of the interesting distinctions, though, between commercial construction and residential construction that I think is really relevant and that has so far done us an enormous favor in the residential part of the industry, and that is that we optimize residences or residential construction for comfort. We optimize commercial construction for productivity. Those are very, very different goals. And those have ventilation and indoor air quality consequences to them. Now, so far, optimizing our homes for comfort has been a real help because there's a real sort of alignment between a lot of the things that make us comfortable and a lot of things that also save energy. So on average, our homes have been getting more airtight, more comfortable, and much, much, much more energy efficient. In commercial construction, where productivity is the main goal, there's less of a focus on that, or there isn't that same alignment. So we often grossly overventilate commercial spaces in the name of productivity and sort of, we think, maybe indoor air quality, and we really, there's a lot of room for innovation in the commercial side as well, because we don't have a very good handle on that on the commercial side. I think actually, weirdly, this is an opportunity for us to kind of, in the residential market, kind of fix and address and provide some guidance to our commercial counterparts, which is ironic because they have a lot more resources.
Well, let me point out two things that I might not agree with that side of the
table. Oh no.
You have to take a
That
contrary
side
point
of
of
the
view.
table.
Wait, I also would like to point out that usually when I disagree with my dad, it means I'm wrong. So please don't embarrass me too much.
All right. Let me support the positive side.
Thank you.
We have the technology now that's going to be cost effective and practical to actually measure contaminants in the space and ventilate according to the level of contaminants in the space, as opposed to taking a wild ass guess. So in other words, we would be ventilating.
That's the technical term is a WAG.
I just wanted to lay it out in case there were architects in the audience.
You're going to have to use smaller words and speak slower.
Shots fired.
This is an attack on this side of the
This
table.
is an attack.
I'm going to pay for it, but understand
Yes,
that
you
I'm going to be.
She'll put you in an okay home.
But no,
Without a wine list.
but you have to understand, I'm going to be a grandfather. That means loud toys, sugars, animals that shed hair. So you be
Sharpie
careful.
markers.
So the technology to be able to ventilate according to need is going to be a huge game changer. And it's coming both residentially and commercially. So as opposed to saying we're going to have to meet 20 CFM per person or 10 CFM or 7.5 or
Not
whatever.
to interrupt, but we have products that we're going to show tomorrow that are just doing exactly that. We're starting to see this integration happening right now in very simple little basic devices where we no longer, like Joe said, have to use a wild-ass gas.
That's actually what I mean, though. In
We'll have cheap
residential,
sensors.
Like the demand for this residentially, I think, is going to improve what we see commercially.
It doesn't make sense in multifamily construction, for example, to have a rooftop system and ventilate all of the units at the same rate.
Exactly.
That's insane, right? Just anyway. Now I'm going to.
There's always the
No,
same
no,
number
no,
of
no,
people in every unit, though, right?
Right, and they're there all the time. And they always do the same thing, and they cook the same way. And they have the same habits.
Yes.
Okay. Of course, because we're all Bernie Sanders people. We're all equal. I got to pay for that one, too. I can see that. So let me now tell you a little bit about what ventilation can't do. Dilution is not the solution to indoor pollution. Let me repeat this. Dilution is not the solution to indoor pollution. Dilution is an incredibly ineffective way of doing this. The future really lies in source control, not selecting products that have stuff that doesn't stay in the stuff. You want the stuff to stay in the stuff. And we do a very bad job of it right now. And part of it is it's going to get me in trouble with the manufacturers, right?
No.
Here it
So
goes.
go for it.
All right, why not? When you read an MSDS sheet, it doesn't tell you what's in the product. It only tells you if any of the stuff on a very short list of bad stuff is in the product. What you really want to know is what's in the product. The manufacturers are saying,
But they
no,
can't
we're
give
not
away
gonna
their
tell you that.
recipe.
well, they don't want, it's a trade secret. And it also means that you want to use the newer stuff that is really dangerous but hasn't been put on the list yet. So what? Don't laugh.
No,
No.
It's all right, Joe. We got rid of VOCs, and now we just have SVOCs, because those are better.
No, we
It's
haven't
a rebranding project.
No, we haven't gotten rid of all VOCs. We've only gotten rid of the VOCs on the list. And so source control is one of the places where we're going to win or lose this, and that's going to require a change in the way manufacturers tell us about their products. But believe it or not, that's only half of the problem. We as builders, engineers, and architects can figure out how to build the building with the stuff in the building. Then we have people called clients and tenants.
They're the worst.
That fill their stuff, they fill their buildings with all kinds of weird stuff. This would be easy if we didn't let people live in our houses. And so the idea is that we need to do the best we can with our product selection. Then we have to design mechanical systems that will handle people that shouldn't be in the gene pool because they're that weird, but then ventilate according to what's actually in the space. And that's going to be kind of the future. So you're going to do source control. You're going to provide a mechanical system that has a higher ventilation rate that normal people would need, commission the building at a lower rate, and then monitor the contaminants in the space and give control of the ventilation set to the occupants. This is going to be insanely exciting.
We're already seeing this as we're seeing not only some of the things that I'm going to show for centralized ventilation systems, but even things like range hood manufacturers are now putting temperature sensors into the hoods. So when the sensor sees the range turn on, it automatically turns it on. Because people don't want to turn their range hoods on and do source control and get the pollutants out of the building. So we're going to cut them out of the equation and turn it on for them.
Well, let's talk about range hoods. God, I love them.
This is a favorite of mine.
All right. 700, 800 CFM exhaust.
1100 CFM.
Oh my God. You can suck a golf ball down a garden hose a mile long with the negative pressure you're going to get. If if radon was valuable, you would collect it this way. And In Michigan, if you have an attached garage, we call that the Kervokian option. And so what we need to do is we need to provide makeup air for these air-consuming devices. I mean, the typical cooktop now is, believe it or not, if you look at the NHB statistics, is 600 CFM. That's a big deal. Then you have dryers. Do you realize that dryers exhaust 200 CFM, and you're down at 3 air changes per hour at 50 pascals with a 2,000 square foot house? You're going to go to 8 to 10 pascals negative. That means your house sucks. And we need to deal with these things.
Scientifically.
Right.
So that's going to require, oh my God, we're going to need to build our kitchens like restaurants. Well, yeah, we don't have. I walked the show, and I've not seen a simple interlocked makeup air system for an exhaust hood. It would be nice.
There's very few. There's one that I actually know of.
And explain what that
well,
is, an interlock system,
Yeah.
or one triggers the other.
Well, it's like a fan that sucks and a fan that blows that talk to one another. Now ask me if I have that in my house.
Do you have one of those, Joe?
No, I open the door.
Very
Why?
complicated system.
Why?
Can
Because
we trust our occupants to open the door?
Well, my wife doesn't trust me to open the door. So I'm learning to cook outside.
The solution is grill outside, eat salad, and take out.
Oh my God, that's so logical.
And that was from an architect.
In fairness, that was from Ross Trethewey.
Yeah.
Well, no, and then what's going to happen when we ban natural gas? Do you have any idea? I live in a community that our neighboring community says no more gas. And I said, whoa. So you really think you're going to be able to heat the northeastern United States in the wintertime with electricity, huh? Just ask
Only
Elon,
from solar panels.
No, just ask Elon Musk how his Tesla works in the winter. We're going to do heat pumps. Don't you know the physics of heat pumps? You know, it gets really, really cold, they're just resistance heating. And we're only going to need them when it's really, really cold because our buildings are becoming what? Insanely freaking efficient. I mean, wow, California. Well, California exports activists, not technology.
Bert. Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
You brought him along, just saying.
Well, now that everything's radioactive, we can't talk about anything, Joe. You set fires all over the country.
No, but look at this as a wonderful challenge. The people that are in the room are going to fix these problems. It's not going to be some university professor doing a study somewhere. We're dealing with this every day. I mean, where's all the innovation coming from? It's coming from us in the room. That's why it's been so. Okay, my dad was a builder. I started as a builder, and I love building, and we solve problems. That's what we do. I'm just giving you, I think, a heads up of what we're going to have to deal with, and note that I've been wrong every time.
So you're saying we can just disregard all of your research and writing and papers?
No, I think you should think for yourself and realize that, whoa, things are changing, and they're changing very rapidly, and we're going to have to learn to adapt. And you don't wait for a study from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. You're going to figure it out yourself, because that's what we do. That's what we do. That's why it's cool to be in the construction industry.
But are there some timeless principles? Like, I was thinking about this when we were looking at this topic, and I was wondering, we have the perfect wall. Thank you for that, by the way. But is there a future perfect wall that's different? Like, I feel like the principles of physics are pretty static. There's not a lot of changes in that. The materials change, the occupants change, the level of the skill of the builder changes. But overall, some of these things are pretty reliable, and I feel like that's a fairly timeless concept. Would you agree with that, or are we going to see something that...
He's biased on that one.
No, I'm not. By the way, I didn't come up with the perfect wall. I just phrased it the perfect wall. I took a 1950s black and white and colorized it. So I'm the Ted Turner of building science, and call it a name. And so I've become, you invented the perfect wall. I said, no, I didn't. I just simply said, look, this
has a name now.
It has a name now. And by the way, it was created by a bunch of Norwegians and a bunch of Canadians who didn't know each other. It's kind of neat. But think about this. Wouldn't it be neat to have a roofing membrane that is vapor open when it's not raining and vapor closed when it is raining? Wouldn't it be nice to have a vapor open wall assembly when it needs to be vapor open and vapor closed when it needs to be vapor closed? Right now we have materials to do this with relative humidity, but couldn't we have a switch that turns it on and off? We could have insulation that's insulation when we need insulation, and it's not insulation when we don't need insulation. Wouldn't that be freaking neat? There's all kinds of really neat stuff that some, genius kid from someplace is going to figure this out.
California.
All of the genius kids are going to Texas from California.
So conceptually tease that out though, because we have a way that we can do this with transmissible light. In a pane of glass, I can decide if I want to allow it to be viewable, or if I just want to go ahead and make it opaque. I can charge the electrons. It can completely block all viewable light through that surface, just like that. It's magic, right? Can we do that with other materials?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and do that, please.
I just talk about shit. I don't do it.
So these are the doers, though.
Those who can't do, teach.
There you go. And those who can't teach, lecture.
Ouch.
Oh.
I'll drink to that.
No, there's all kinds of possibilities, and it's actually going to be, I think, insanely exciting. I mean, look, we've gone from, vacuum tubes to nano computers in our life. Come on, this is woo.
I think one of the biggest things that I think is really empowering for our industry right now is the exchange of information that we're all part of. A handful of years ago, I was just some carpenter wearing my tool bags lecturing my crew about enthalpy, while they're like, shut up, is it lunchtime yet? But now I can find people like Christine and Travis and Emily and Joe, and we can engage in these conversations because we have this ability now to share information so easily. I think is going to be the biggest strength for our industry right now is to continue to do that, to continue to come things like this and engage online and go to live events and talk to one another and just kind of hash these things out. That's why this whole BS and beer thing got started is we all wanted to get together in person to be able to talk through these things because none of us have the answers, but we're all trying. And I think that's important.
Oh, Joe has the answers? Of course. Oh, you have the question. Even
Yes,
better.
sir. Mr. Stiebrick in the back.
I really think we should tolerate dissenting views and dissenting opinions.
I think that's a great idea.
I think
Right.
we do that. Don't we do that as an industry? That's what we're talking about, the exchange of ideas.
No, we are not talking. We now have camps.
The echo chamber.
And I'm saying that we don't want us to become social media. All right? And just because you have a different most of my career I've been on the wrong side
I'm
of
following your channel after this.
Well, no, most of my career I've been on the wrong side of consensus at the time I had a particular opinion. And I lost my job, my career was destroyed, and I managed to survive with friends backing me up. We need to have tolerance and flexibility for dissenting views. And I don't want to see this generation now that's coming up to have to go through some of the crap that I went through and some of the crap that I see happening every day in other professions. So, it'd be nice to be able to engage with different opinions without having to worry about having a roll of Tyvek show up in your bed. That was The Godfather. That was a
You're a
good
big
there.
fan of that movie, aren't you?
I absolutely love that. Charlie don't surf. COVID don't surf. I love the smell of mold in the morning.
We just got to get Fortunate Son playing in the background as we fly into these things. Sorry.
Look, some of the greatest ideas were ones that were laughed at the very beginning. Yeah.
So what do you think? So what do you think are the weak points in the industry where we're investing too much time or too much energy chasing our own tail?
Robotics and computers taking away the judgment of a human being. Luke, turn off the guidance system. Go with the force. Use the damn judgment. This drives me crazy.
So we're not going to have robotic arms taking our jobs out in the industry, is what you're saying?
At some point, there's going to be an adult involved that's going to have to make a judgment call. And right now, people seem to think it's magic. I mean, if you have to do a woofie simulation to figure out whether your wall is working or not, you have no idea how your wall should have been designed in the first freaking place.
I get asked that type of stuff a lot, actually. And when I tell people outside of the industry what I do, particularly the forensic part of my job, I'll describe a particular failure, maybe an interesting one or one that I think is interesting. And the number one question I get, and this is probably, you've actually probably all experienced this, the number one sort of initial response I get is, well, how was that allowed? Like, how was that, whatever that caused that particular failure, how was it permitted by code? And I think the instinct to like codify everything is really strong. It's like a tell me what to do and I'll do it. But I think as just like look around, not even the entire room, but just this part of the room, look at the technology on display and the number of options on display. It's not, these things aren't black and white. They require professional judgment. And it's really hard to develop that, and I think some of this stuff actually just it cannot be codified. We cannot capture it in the way that we sort of want to, in a pass-fail criteria or something. And speaking of that, in terms of developing professional judgment, one of the strengths I see in social media is the ability to look at someone else's job site. I mean, assuming they show it to you, right? I think we probably all also have the experience of being in a new place and driving around and like pulling over the car and annoying our family and to take a few pictures of some construction site. Those are valuable experiences, and that's part of how we gain more nuance in our understanding of the principles that we're adopting in our daily practice. And what I've loved about Instagram and other methods of social media from a construction perspective is seeing how people do things in other places and seeing what works. And a lot of times, speaking of dissent, a lot of times I'll see stuff that challenges my understanding of the right approach. And that is, I don't hate seeing that, I love seeing it, because it tells me that there's something that I don't understand, and it challenges me to figure out what I don't understand. Is it that they're just lucky? Is it that I'm wrong? There's a lot of possibilities in between just right or wrong. Is there some other principle at play that is relevant in this situation that I didn't know about until now, that makes this work in this setting? Why is this an exception to a rule? And there's a real benefit in particularly the BS and beer community, but in social media generally, in that particular area.
Yeah, dissent is opportunity. That's the place where everyone gets better, because the discussion is what educates the people in the other climate that don't have that problem to get that. Oh, I see why you did it that way now. If they don't ask the question, if they don't raise the, oh, you would never do that way, that's gonna fail in so whatever period of time. You're like, well, yeah, in your climate, I'm in 4A and I don't have that problem, so I can do it this way.
Or,
I see poly on a wall and I go, oh my God, it's a wet diaper. You're going to have mold. I got to help this person out. And they're like, yeah, I'm an 8. I need the poly. Like,
yeah. And that's actually a great example. We were talking about rain screens earlier. Like, you'll see Canadians look at rain screen requirements as being so minimal in the US and be like, you're wrong. You need a bigger space. You need all this stuff. Well, like, they're not declaring that they're using poly on the interior of their structures. Like, it's what assumptions am I bringing into this without realizing that they're assumptions? And seeing other people's work helps you identify some of those assumptions, and then it makes you understand the physics better.
That's it, because that's the sweet spot where all of a sudden the person understands not just what's required to get them past their final inspection, but now they get the why. Now they understand, oh, these are the principles that I'm working with, and now they understand how to make things better, because they've moved from fulfilling a checklist into understanding a concept, and now they can apply that in a thoughtful way to other things. And it's this massive leap forward for a low-level builder or somebody new to the game that's not really been exposed to all the white papers on BSC. Now all of a sudden they go, oh, I get it, it's about drying, or oh, I get it, whatever the concept is.
You have to add also, oh, it's politics. The reason Vancouver has a 19 millimeter air gap behind stucco is because of the 1980s condo crisis, And the 19 millimeters is actually my fault because I needed an air gap behind stucco, and I went to the local lumber yard and picked up a 1x4. And the 1x4 is 19 freaking millimeters. There was no research. It was just the crap that was available that I needed to fix the damn building the next goddamn day. And we also had the problem because we had a polyethylene air vapor barrier, which was a dumb idea for Vancouver, but it was mandated by the Energy Mines and Resources in Ottawa, and a 2x6 wall. And we changed from plywood to OSB. So all of these things were more politically driven, and the only answer was to have an excessively large air gap. In Seattle, turns out that we didn't need that. We didn't have the poly. We didn't have all of that insulation, and all we needed was basically a quarter of an inch. So sometimes the politics trumps the physics. Are we allowed to use that word, trumps?
Or the materials available.
Sometimes the Biden trumps the bad joke. I know.
I caught that one.
Thank you for the beer.
But Dr. Joe, don't you see that's the value in it, though? Like, all of a sudden now these folks are the ones that are going to lead the industry, because even though there is always a power structure at play, and there is someone higher up than the next guy who's going to be, or gal, who's going to say no, there's also the groundswell. So we educate our code officials on our job sites to things that they don't know. I read a Mike Girton article about using a box beam and a sheathing as a header, and I educate my code official about why I don't need to put wood in the wall, and I can put insulation there instead. Even though it's in the code, he doesn't know that because that's not something that's common. That's an opportunity.
Big book to memorize everything in.
Well, no, but one more thing, and then I'm going to not say another damn thing because I'm already getting dirty looks. We need to talk more openly about failures. Medical profession a long time ago taught us, and same thing with aircraft investigations on crashes, where when people died, we'd get together and we would have a post-mortem where people were honestly, openly talk with no risk of retribution about what happened, what they think went wrong, and whatever. And we no longer talk about it that way because of attorneys, liability, and risk. And I've learned more from failure than I've learned from success. And so I like to point out that failure has made me the man I am today, but it's talking about it. And it would be nice if we were the best technology information group amongst talking to us rather than the legal profession. Right now, the legal profession is providing technology change, and that's the wrong way of doing it. And we're not open enough to talk about, what some of the most closely held statistics are in the construction industry? The warranty statistics of builders. Wouldn't it be nice to know, I don't have any problems, I don't have any freaking problems. Then when you get them out into the bar and you get them, a little lubricated, holy shit, 18% of our buildings have drywall cracking. Well, what happened? Well, we went to truss roofs and added insulation. Oh, okay. We need to talk about failure so that we can all avoid it. And right now, that's not happening enough.
One of our, I had a favorite client, and I'm sort of embarrassed to tell this out, but I'm going to tell it anyway because I think it's valuable. This was on the commercial side. I was working on 2 big commercial projects, and I was a consultant, and my job was to minimize the risk of water-related failures. And a particular approach I recommended a particular approach, and it was to something, it doesn't matter what it is, and it was ruled too expensive. And so the developer and contractor, same group, proposed something else that I was unfamiliar with, and I accepted it. I couldn't find a reason of principle why what they were proposing wouldn't work, so we went through with that option, and it ended up causing a failure that cost them on each building about $1 million. So it was an extremely expensive failure. Now these projects were very expensive as well, but nobody likes writing that kind of check. Now, fortunately, insurance covered some of that loss, but it was not just, you're never made whole fully by a warranty claim either, right? No one is. Even on the residential side, you might get a check, but you've had the aggravation, you've had to run this down, there's maybe you lose time in your house, there's a lot of stress that goes into that kind of failure. Anyway, this was a very big one. And and it had many authors. I certainly contributed to it by not stopping this this pathway for us from taking down this going down this pathway. But they recognized their role in it as well. What was interesting though about this whole exercise is that the client was a $1 billion company, big developer, and not one person lost their job after that. So $1 million checks got written and not one person lost their job. And I love that client, and I think that client is a great example of benefiting from institutional failures. If they had fired people to send a message, or I don't know, maybe it would have made somebody look better in a board meeting, but they would have lost the benefit of the institutional knowledge. And instead, what they did was discuss how that failure ended up happening and what we could do to reduce the likelihood of it happening again. And I have a lot of that's hard to do. It's hard for me to even talk about. I feel terrible that I contributed to that particular failure. But what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the kind of person that can't talk about it and is just embarrassed and then repeats it? And judges others for doing that? Or do you want to be the kind of person that can listen to it, as painful as it is, and figure out a better way next time?
That's one of the things that I think is dangerous and toxic about social media, though, is people so often curate what they're sharing.
Exactly.
And they're showing the right angles and that perfect miter joint, but who knows, the whole rest of that house might be garbage.
And they leave out the context.
And they leave out the context.
Yeah.
So all we see is that little snippet of it. So I always try and temper my reverence or things like that I see on there, thinking to myself, like, there's probably other things wrong there. So, maybe that's just me trying to protect my own ego so I don't beat myself up too much about these things. But I think we need to bear that in mind, is that as a community, for the most part, I think we're really doing phenomenal work, like Joe said. And sometimes we miss the point and we see these great, beautiful photos that people are putting out there of these incredible things, and we feel like, oh, they're the ones that are actually doing the good work. No.
One of the best, most insightful observations in our industry, I think, was made by, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dad, was made by John Straub. Maybe the observation isn't original to him, where he said that every building is essentially a prototype. It's a one-off, and I think that sets the tone of learning really well. But it also is painful, right? We're not making widgets, so of course the buildings you build now are different than the buildings you built 20 years ago, and they're going to be different in 20 years, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
It was Straube, yep. Sorry, Professor Straub.
Straube.
Straube.
I think our friend Doug Horgan, they have a fairly large construction company, and he said, he learned so much by being the fix-it guy. He was the guy for years who went around and fixed all the failures. And now in their company, he has the ability to teach everybody else, like, hey, this is what went wrong, whatever. And I think us as a community need to be willing to share those things so that we're one big company of like, hey, okay, maybe this didn't go the way we expected it to, and be okay with sharing that, because maybe it'll save someone the next time, on that. Or yourself. So we have a really unique opportunity to have both Christine and Joe here tonight. And so it's the time in the show where we usually ask questions. And I think that now is an opportunity, if there are people in the audience who would love to get their burning questions from either of these two guests.
The question was Thank you for that.
What was that?
Two extremes.
Wait,
One
is anyone paying attention?
do you trust a woofy analysis, or do you trust in arbitrary capricious tables in the building code?
Designed by Wolfie,
The answer, you trust neither of them.
designed by tables that are updated every year from politics. Both are bad. What do we do? What do we really want to do? And I'll say personally, I've done something restores really
So
it's really frustrating that I've got to bring
you're going to have to
touch this
through
little wall,
experience and judgment and ask
everything goes by the book.
Let me just read.
I was going to repeat it.
Okay,
No,
go
you're
ahead.
going to repeat existing buildings.
Go ahead.
I mean, like, well, so
I love existing buildings
the question
because
was
they're insanely
two
interesting and complicated.
levels or two extremes.
People
One is,
actually ask me why
do
I
you
don't
trust
on,
a woofy
why I don't
analysis,
use
or do
existing
you
buildings on
trust
Instagram to teach.
I'm going to use words an
And the
arbitrary
reason
and
is because
capricious
there's
table
too many variables
in the
and there's
building
too
code.
much context
And the
to
answer,
present
you trust
in
neither
that
of them.
format, in the
You rely on
in the
judgment.
kind of way that I
The
teach.
code
I'm
was
not
never meant to
dissuading
be.
other people from posting their current work
It's-
on retrofits.
it's a place to
but
start,
Capturing the context,
not a place to be
particularly in existing
finished.
buildings, is
And
extremely
the code
difficult. And
doesn't
there
have to be rigidly followed.
there
You
are
can
definitely
provide
rules
equivalent
of
performance. You
thumb
have the
for
ability to
new
be flexible.
construction that
So
are
I'm saying
relatively easy to share.
you're going to
Some
have
of them,
to,
obviously,
through your experience and judgment and asking
in
other people,
retrofits, there
go
are
to neither of
way
those
fewer
extremes.
rules of thumb
And
to share.
it's especially
And
complicated
that
with
that makes even
rehabilitating
sharing
existing
information
buildings.
and teaching about it really
I mean,
difficult.
like,
Case studies, I think,
and by
end
the way,
up
I
being,
love existing
from a
buildings because
practical
they're
perspective, from a
insanely
teaching perspective, end up
interesting and
being
complicated.
one of the best ways we have to
People actually
develop
ask me why I don't
skill set, that professional judgment
why I don't
among
use existing
our-
buildings on
among the
Instagram to
building
teach.
industry is
And the
by
reason is because there's
presenting
too
case
many
studies where we
variables
can
and there's
really
too
look
much
at all of the
context to
context,
present
because
in
it's
that
very hard to
format
come
in
up
the
with
in the kind of way that I teach. I'm not
code
dissuading
citation
other
or
people
something
from
like that.
posting their current work on
For me,
retrofits, but
you've said
capturing the
something a while ago,
context,
Christine, that resonated
particularly
with
in
me.
existing
We're in the
buildings, is
business of
extremely
managing
difficult.
risk.
And there are
And that's professional risk
there
on
are
a daily
definitely
basis. We're the
rules of
ones that are
thumb
generally
for
as the
new
builder ultimately
construction
responsible
that
for what
are
happens with that building.
relatively easy to share. Some of them,
And
obviously.
to develop
In
this
in
spidey
retrofits,
sense
there
of
are
what's the
way
right choice
fewer rules of
takes
thumb
time.
to share.
And I don't always have the
and that
right
makes
answer
makes
in
even
some of these
sharing information and
situations, or I'm
teaching
not
about it really
confident that I have the right
difficult.
answer. So what I
Case
do is
studies, I think,
I
end
reach
up
out to
being,
resources
from
that
a
I
practical
have.
perspective,
I'll
from a
call my
teaching
code officials
perspective,
and ask
end
them
up
for some
being
guidance
one
if
of the
they'll
best
provide
ways
it.
we have
I'll
to
reach out to
develop
manufacturers of the
that skill
products
set,
might
that
be
professional
involved in
judgment
the
among
situation
our
and try and get some
among the building
resources from
industry
them and
is
get some
by
input from them.
presenting
I'll talk
case
to
studies
reps
where
at
we
my
can really
local
look at all of the
lumber yards
context,
sometimes. I'll talk to
because
other
it's very
builders.
hard to come up with
we can't
a
all just
table, a
cultivate
rule,
this
a code
perfect,
citation, or something like
zen
that.
For me, you've said something a while ago, Christine, that resonated with me. We're in the business of managing risk, and that's professional risk on a daily basis. We're the ones that are, generally as the builder, ultimately responsible for what happens with that building. And to develop this spidey sense of what's the right choice takes time, and I don't always have the right answer in some of these situations, or I'm not confident that I have the right answer. So what I do is I reach out to resources that I have. I'll call my code officials and ask them for some guidance if they'll provide it. I'll reach out to manufacturers of the products that I might be involved in the situation and try and get some resources from them and get some input from them. I'll talk to reps at my local lumber yard sometimes. I'll talk to other builders. So, we can't all just cultivate this perfect, zen of this is the right choice in this application. You have to tap resources. You have to tap education. You have to try and reach out and just draw on what you can in those moments of tough decisions.
Climate zones and Ashley stole them from me. You should ask.
Randy Williams, ladies and gentlemen. Randy Williams, the Northern
Joe, where'd you get that?
I stole them from the dead.
I live in
If you're going to steal stuff from a Russian should be dead. It's always better to do
With the
that.
last climate change, climate zone map, I moved a little bit closer to Mexico.
Basically took the Copen climate
How
maps
much should we be
and I
worrying about
said a rough
retrofit
idea from
techniques or
a construction perspective. I figured
what should we be changing?
that the Plant Kingdom was a better judge of temperature relative
So
to
the question
rainfall
was,
than architects and
with the
engineers.
shifting climate
And it was
zone
just
maps, how
meant
much
to
should we
be
be preparing for that
in the
with what we're
neighborhood.
building now?
And to have it,
I think you
on
should
a
ignore
cl-
all of that.
on a county
I
by
think
county basis.
the stuff is
was
arbitrary and
insanely
capricious.
ridiculous. And then, you think
by the
about
way,
this.
I'm
Say you're in
responsible for all of
on one
those
side of the street
climate
you're in climate
zones.
zone
And
4, and the other side of the street you're in climate zone 5. and
Ashley
you're gonna
stole
have
them from me.
basically
You should
different
ask
construction
me where I got them.
requirements because you
Joe,
have-
where'd you get
that's-
those from?
that's
I
not-
stole them from
say
a
you're
dead
also in the
Russian.
middle of climate zone 4.
If you're going
and
to
you're
steal
right on
stuff
the
from a
water
Russian,
beside a
the
swamp,
Russian should be dead.
and
It's always better
150
to do
yards
that.
away up the hill,
This
you're on the
Russian's
top
been
of the
dead
mountain.
100
If
years.
you value your life,
For the
then
amount of
it's,
risk, it was never
I
meant
basically took
to
the
take
Copen
away
climate maps
judgment,
and I said a
And yet
rough
that's
idea
what-
from a construction
This is an
perspective. I
exercise of
figured that
blindfolded
the vet
people
I figured that the
taking
Plant Kingdom
fly
was a better
droppings
judge
out
of
of
temperature
pepper
relative
while
to mean
wearing
rainfall than
boxing
architects
gloves.
and engineers.
Right, that's
and it was just
anally
meant to be
fastidious, stupid stuff.
in the neighborhood.
Turn off
and
that
to
climate
have it,
map.
on a
Go and see
on a
what
county
the
by
hell is
county
going on.
basis was
And
insanely
go- and
ridiculous.
That's why I don't get
And
invited
then
to those
you think about
conferences.
this. Say you're in the
on one side of the street you're in climate zone 4, and the other side of the street you're in climate zone 5, and you're going to have basically different construction requirements because you have that's nuts. Say you're also in the middle of climate zone 4 and you're right on the water beside a swamp, and 150 yards away up the hill you're on the top of the mountain, and you're going to say that both are the amount of risk. It was never meant to take away judgment, and yet that's what this is, an exercise of blindfolded people picking fly droppings out of pepper while wearing boxing gloves. All right, that's anally fastidious, stupid stuff. Turn off that climate map. Go and see what the hell is going on. And go, I mean, that's why I don't get invited to those conferences. Well, I'll give you the easy one. We teach engineers incorrectly, and we teach architects incorrectly, and the engineers need to turn off their computers, and the engineers and architects need to be in the same room with one another for at least a year so that they know what the hell's going on. And there are a few institutions that are beginning to do this, and I think that would be magnificent for that we actually know how to communicate with one another. I hate the computer, all right? I was the last engineering class in Canada in 1978 that wasn't allowed to use a programmable calculator. I had to use a slide ruler, all right? So I had the big slide ruler. And what was neat about the slide rule was that you didn't know where the decimal place would go. So you had to do a quick and dirty rough order of magnitude calculation to know where you were in the ballpark or not. And that required a fair bit of judgment. We called those people Lucky Strike engineers because Lucky Strike was a cigarette package that had a red round dot on it and no other writing. And if you couldn't do your order of magnitude calculation on the back of a Lucky Strike, you didn't know enough about the problem to do the freaking calculation in the first damn place. And so the idea is that it relied on doing judgment. The other thing was that, it took hours to do a calculation. So you actually asked yourself, do I really want to do this freaking calculation? Now I've got a computer that does 15,000 calculations in a goddamn microsecond, and nobody has any idea what any of it means. Luke, turn off the guidance system, go with some damn judgment. We need to teach engineers to be engineers, architects to be architects, need to be in the same room.
For me, the thing that I immediately recoil against is another layer of control over top of what we're already doing. I think what we don't need is we don't need anything else putting roadblocks in the way of us making professional judgments. What we need is resources to help us get education and information.
Better professional judgment.
Better professional
judgment.
And there are companies out here that you will see around here that are looking at doing exactly that. Emily and I have joked for years, because I make these YouTube videos and do trainings and stuff like that, that if we could put QR codes on our blueprints that go to videos of how to install window flashings that I've done. That's the kind of thing we need. We don't need some body or some bureaucracy or some corporation to be telling us something's right or wrong. We need free dispersal of information.
Although I will say I've actually looked into this in a sort of more disciplined way than I was used to. Typically, I'm asked technical questions that have technical answers. And I was asked by a city, I don't know that I can talk about it yet, but anyway, an American city, to evaluate some pervasive construction problems in that city, and they wanted to figure out how to fix that. And the technical stuff was pretty comfortable to me, and it was pretty obvious. There were some pretty specific technical issues and gaps in the knowledge, specific gaps in the trade base in that jurisdiction. So that was the technical part of that question. But it became clear to me that the problem was only partially technical, and that there were other problems that I'm not an expert in at all that had to do with making the people who produce things and draw things and design things and then build them accountable for what they produce and draw and design and build. And in places where that connection doesn't exist, and homeowners, for example, aren't able to hold builders accountable for egregiously bad construction, that's a policy issue and a legal issue that we can't educate our way out of. And so there's sort of two components to that. And one thing we're very good at, and I think that's important for us to focus on, but it's not the only thing that needs to happen. This particular jurisdiction, for example, had there was no law governing it, so it was just regular contract law. And the Realtors Association in that area had a standard contract that essentially indemnified I said that, I don't even really know what indemnify means. The Realtors Association had this contract that made the builders and the sellers not responsible for any defect whatsoever.
Yay,
and what was crazy.
I'm going to move to this county, become a builder, and I'm going to become rich.
Well, and it was actually incredible. You know who was incredibly frustrated with this arrangement? The local builders association. And the reason is, talk to a builder who has ever lost a job, lost a bid to an incompetent counterpart because the homeowner or the client didn't know to insist on certain quality control measures that his competitor was not taking into account. They didn't know to insist on it. So actually the builders were really upset about this. But it's an example of not just being a technical issue in our industry. There is a role for intelligent policy-related stuff. That's not something that I personally am going to get involved in, but maybe it's something that some of you guys are interested in. And that needs to be intelligently and sensitively. We need to apply the same kind of intelligent and sensible professional judgment in that part of the industry as well. It's not just the technical education.
Hello, how are you? I have so many questions, but I think the picture, our industry is going toward this, being carbon negative and all these new materials to reduce our carbon footprint. At the same time, all these other technologies are evolving to make, foam better and this sort of thing. There's this amazing amount of confusion about what is the priority of what we're building. And also, as solar gets cheaper and cheaper, we don't need to insulate our houses so much anymore because we can be net zero really easily. And then the last part of it, and I don't know how it all puts together, is that we all think about what we do so much, but what we create trickles down and is put in place by builders who are not thinking about it that much. For example, everyone in Connecticut who does spray foam, spray foams, the underside of the attic sheeting with open cell foam, not closed cell. Why? So it all gets very confusing and complicated, and at the same time, technology is evolving, so we need to make our houses less and less amazingly energy efficient. So I'm just wondering where you think the priority will be in the future, and how we simplify it.
Do you want to take that one, Joe? I'm kind of...
We're kind of stumped.
Be sure and repeat it for the podcast.
Yeah, I don't know that I can repeat that one, and thankfully I hope they got that. That was Elizabeth DeSalvo, who I have the pleasure to share office with and do a lot of work with.
All right, so this is called an opinion. This is an opinion.
You know what they say about opinions, don't you, Joe?
I know what they say, and don't repeat that.
I'm not going to.
Thank you. Look, the grid is unreliable, and it's going to get even more unreliable the more we are wanting to put solar and wind into the grid. And that's going to affect our houses, and what I'm beginning to see is that this is going to sound like really weird out there, but we might have to actually put thermal storage into our buildings to be able to go through the swings and the whatever, because it's not sunny all the time, and it's not windy all of the time, and we don't have really good batteries, and I don't see any of the real batteries in the future that make much sense. The best battery is potential energy, and that's pumping water up a hill and letting it run down, but nobody wants us to dam up things and pump it up and down the hill. And so what's one of the biggest things that's selling right now? Generators. And I think that we can rely less on generators if we actually now couple a bit of thermal storage with our building to change basically the footprint, the response time So I'm going to say we're probably going to see double layers of drywall on the interior partitions and gypcrete floors, so that we'll be able to go through the hips and valleys because the grid is so unreliable. The more we go in this direction to go to solar and wind, which I'm not disagreeing with, just that the people that are doing this on the policy side are incompetent, and we're going to end up having to work within that incompetent system, and the houses are going to have to be able to ride through the peaks and the valleys of the available or not available energy. So you heard it here first. Steberg is talking about thermal mass, but distributed thermal
I
mass.
thought we got rid of that in the 70s.
Well, we did when we had a reliable energy grid.
But your thermal, maybe explain that to people. Your concept of thermal mass in this context is a little bit different. People are, we think of thermal mass as exposed, uninsulated concrete that is exposed to sunlight. You're describing something different.
Yeah,
Well,
to me it sounds like you're describing that as coupled also with enhanced insulation and air sealing also.
Yeah, I want a super insulated building with distributed internal mass. I'm using the wrong phrase. What we need to do is change the time constant of the building. In other words, how quickly it changes.
Oh,
Thanks for
I
simplifying
totally
that.
get that now.
Now everyone's on board.
Fucking engineers.
So you're able to manipulate time, is what you're alluding to.
About smoking those mushrooms, Joe.
Yes. What's interesting is if you have an extremely well insulated building and the heat loss and heat gain are very, very slow, the amount of energy that's stored internally in that building is able to moderate the external temperature changes and the lack of available energy. And so how long it takes for the temperature to change when the energy flux is changed, we call that the time constant. And light frame buildings have a very, very small, very short time constant. And so we can't run through a power outage or a heating outage or whatever. But if you have a longer time constant, you can go through several days or a week without having electricity and not freeze to death or not get insanely hot. And so I'm just simply saying,
practically speaking, like what would an example be of actually doing that using the materials that we have available now, relatively common construction techniques?
Well, I'm simply saying double up your drywall, 2 layers of interior gypsum board. It's insanely distributed. It's all over the freaking place. You don't need a lot. I mean, it's dumb to say we're going to insulate our basements on the outside for the basement thermal mass, which is you can't get the energy into it and out of it in a practical way. But where you're living, if your floors and your walls have the ability to store some energy, thermal energy, that's going to be a big deal. And so I'm saying double up your drywall, go with basically gypcrete floors, which are great for fire and sound resistance. And, don't go to wall-to-wall carpets, go to tile. And I think that's going to be enough. So you go to high levels of thermal resistance, add some distributed thermal mass, and increase your time constant, and we can live with a not completely reliable grid. And then when you add your PV, some of it is going to go into heat, and some of it is going to go into chemical storage, depending on whether you want power or whether you want energy. That's going to be a lot of fun in the next couple of years. And we're going to have to go there because we're incompetent in running the grid.
I think this makes a lot of sense, not only when we're looking at things from the grid aspect and that end of things, but we had that break in the 70s where we lost the mass in glass and we went to super insulation. And I think what we need to see is we need to see a more holistic amalgamation of those things kind of coming back together a little bit, because we've gone this route where we've gone to all airtight and lots of insulation. We've lost those tools that we have in thermal mass that we can put into houses to kind of dull those amplitudes of those temperature changes. And even if we don't lose the grid, and we're not talking about that, this is just going to slow the delta T in our changes in temperature in the house and allow us to operate in a tighter bandwidth.
Well, it's actually going to make the grid more reliable. And you sound like a 70s, 60s hippie. And I'm agreeing with you. My God, I need
What is going on here?
I need a beard
Both
like
did
you.
mushrooms today.
Jesus.
So my whole thing, and I'll take this one on because you gingerly avoided the carbon question, and I am by no means an expert in this area, but what I'm seeing as somebody who's trying to keep up with this is that we don't have the tools yet to make rational decisions about what we're doing with carbon. And Joe got at this before about if we were doing our taxes like we're doing our carbon accounting right now, we'd all be in jail. That's assuming that you do your taxes. But
I pay a lot of taxes, and I'm actually proud to pay taxes, even in Massachusetts, because I'm no longer in Canada.
The People's Republic of Massachusetts. But I think that's really what we need now, and I think we need to keep having these conversations and pushing this forward so that we can maybe get to tools that we can trust in some degree. And for me, I don't even want a tool for carbon accounting that is 100% accurate. I just want a tool that's accurate enough that I can see big differences between things so that I can make somewhat of an informed decision.
So you could make a judgment call.
That's precisely it. So I can use professional judgment on where we need to go with things.
The freedom to operate with success is pretty valuable. Oh, here we go.
Elizabeth, I know you've spoken a lot about the amount of glass that we build today as opposed to in the past.
Please call me Joe. The doctor's just for bartenders in court.
All right, Joe. It took a lot to get that, so So anyway, I know you've talked a lot about window area and glass, and from the old days to now, and this demand for large windows, is that going to negate that thermal mass?
Well, no. Back in the day when my Toronto Maple Leafs actually won a Stanley Cup, we had pretty crappy glass. We now have readily available R5 to R8 glass, and that changes the entire dynamic. And I predict that within another 5 years, you're going to have R10 residential glass, and all of a sudden, that mass and glass and all of that, we're going to be able to live with, 20-30% glazing and high efficiency walls and not throw it all away. Right now, it's kind of colossally stupid where the architectural profession is building all glass buildings. That's insanely ridiculous, and then lecturing us about how we have to basically save the freaking planet. Well, take away the goddamn windows. But guess what? In a couple of years, we'll be able to have all kinds of windows, and like really good windows. So, and by the way, I'm not commenting about the beauty of the glass buildings. I think they're insanely beautiful. I want to have beautiful buildings that aren't energy pigs, and we're very, very close to having that. So, I mean, to say, look, let's have a light frame building super insulated with 10% glass, it's ugly and high performance. We call that a passive house.
I have to challenge something here. And that is that
Come on, this is...
Shots fired.
Shots fired.
I want glass, I want mass. I mean, what do you think about this?
I think there's a little bit of a false choice here, and I think it's increasingly becoming a false choice in that we greatly overestimate in conversations about this, overestimate how much glass will make most people comfortable anyway. And I think we're getting close, so I'm going to agree that we're getting close to the point where this sort of limit on how much glass we can use and still be high performing is a target, certainly residentially, that we rarely butt up against. If you estimate the window to wall ratio in your house now, think of that number, think about what you think that is, and when you go home, get a tape measure out and actually do that calculation. And I bet you anything you overestimate how much glass is in your home. I've done this calculation in my own home. My house is a 100-year-old Craftsman. It looks completely normal. It looks like every other house in my neighborhood. It's bright and nice inside, and it's 16% glass. 16%. That's not a lot, and if we're talking about butting up against efficiency around 30-40%, I mean, that's a lot of glass. I don't think I've ever really worked on I've never in my capacity as a consultant worked on a home that was more than 40% glazed. Now, I know they exist, right? But in our professional practice, we don't realistically end up getting there. I think the right approach is for us to treat our entire enclosure, including the glass, as an investment, and really make it count. And practically speaking, I think we have the materials to make that not a contest between comfort and beauty and efficiency. Practically,
We're real close. I mean, with our 5 windows, 25% glazing area for a typical building is not going to be an issue. 15 years ago, we would have like, really? You think that's energy efficient? Why don't you get a Yugo? That used to be a car that.
It's terrible.
That
phenomenally ugly.
That yeah. Anyway, but so I mean, it's kind of neat. Once again, this innovative technology is getting us to the place where, believe it or not, we're super insulated glass buildings with mass. I mean, who would have thought that we'd be actually talking like this? And it's like, wow, that's kind of neat.
It's here.
It's here. And also distributed energy, because we're not going to be able to rely on central energy anymore. And I'm wow, who would have thought? Well, it reminds me of the late 1960s, early 1970s, whether we're going to have central computers like IBM 370s or individual laptops. Well, guess what won?
Well, we all have both, and all operating it all the time. That's why we need a grid.
True, yeah.
No, we don't have. I don't have both. Luke, turn off the guidance system.
I'll text you later.
I was gonna say, I think we have time probably for one more.
I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of Joe. I think it's really exciting to hear you. Didn't expect to see this. I do have a question for Joe. I'm wondering, in the last couple of years, if you have taken embodied carbon materials like insulation, like if you have a different perspective than maybe you had earlier in your career.
Yeah.
So the question, just for the recording, is whether or not Joe has a different perspective on the carbon of materials than previously.
The impact and weight of embodied carbon when we're looking at the carbon count. I know carbon count is a favorite topic, but we look to you, and I'm just curious if you have sort of
Well, the issue for me was pretty straightforward. When we had inefficient buildings, why did we care about embodied energy? Now we've got insanely efficient buildings, and the embodied energy now is something that we need to look at. If we want to go all the way, okay. So now I'm thinking about it, and I see us dramatically reducing the amount of concrete. I mean, it was kind of funny. I did a lot of wood foundations and wood slab on grades in the 70s, and who would have thought that, gee, that actually could work today? I'm not talking about getting rid of all concrete, but I'm simply saying, okay, we can play around with all of this, and so I think it's a serious thing now, because we've gotten so good at the rest of the energy picture of the building. What are the right answers? I don't know yet, but it's going to be a lot of fun hanging out with all you folks as you solve the problem.
One of the things that I think is going to be particularly difficult and dangerous for us in that area is not losing sight of what it is we're actually trying to accomplish with whatever metric or metrics that we develop. And I think we had this problem. Maybe that's it. Oh, no. We've had this problem. Mic cut. That's it.
Shut it down.
Maybe conspiracy. I think we've seen this and become frustrated by it in energy accounting, right? We sometimes develop these, or not sometimes, we develop these. If we develop these standards for efficiency and then we use them to replace professional judgment, we end up having buildings that meet the standard but are by no means actually energy efficient or environmentally responsible. And I think we're going to see the same sort of we're going to be presented with the same challenge when it comes to accounting for carbon. The question is going to be, how do we intelligently do this in a way that actually is effective? Because we're not counting carbon for carbon's sake. We're not pursuing efficiency for its own sake. We're pursuing it for a very specific we want to be environmentally responsible as we can be. and that means something different than just coming up with a standardized metric. But the rush, same thing with, like, we've talked about this. This is, if there's a theme running through what we've talked about, it's being able to exercise professional judgment. And we cannot apply. This isn't going to be unlike every other thing we've talked about, where we apply some pass-fail criteria. We don't even do it. We don't do it with structure. We don't do it with moisture management. We don't do it with energy, and we're not going to be able to do it with carbon. We're going to. This is going to be another area where we're going to have to apply professional judgment. It's not just a black and white. There's no perfect standard out there. There's a bunch of us doing the best we can with the information that we have available.
And I think with that, we're at the end of our time here. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Christine and Joe for joining us. This, to me, was a rousing success. And I want to thank all of you for coming with us.
Lights off. Apparently, you all have to go home.
Thank you all.
Show yourselves out under cover of night. Good luck.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Stay here.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.